Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And it's a Wednesday. It's Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. Great to be with you here on EWTN, moving to the middle of May, and of course a big Mother's Day weekend and lots of great programming with that in mind coming up this week, including, of course, our program, and Doug Keck will fill us in on Friday with our fact check. Well, actually, I'll have fact check Friday, but he'll have the inside word regarding the programming coming up this weekend and then next week. And again, we are in the Marian month of May, so of course, being our Blessed Mother, also great topics on the Blessed Mother as well. Today, however, getting to our programming this morning on a Wednesday, very excited to have Father Chris Seith on with us. His book is Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. Now, if the name sounds familiar, and it should if you're a regular listener to this program in EWTN, it may be because we did an interview back on April 18th, several weeks ago, with Johnny Seith, author of a beautiful book, Pain of Grace. I did not know, maybe she had mentioned her son with the priest, but I was so intrigued by her testimony that maybe it just, fled my mind. I don't know, but she had such an incredible story in terms of the suffering that she lives with, and in particular, physical disability that she has, and how it keeps her pretty much in pain all the time, but how she's been able to use this pain and reduce his suffering and pray for other people. And obviously, she's producing a lot of fruit. Her son, an amazing priest, and he's also the director of spiritual formation for the John Paul II Seminary in Washington, D.C., known as a rising star in the Archdiocese there. And also he's a spiritual advisor for a number of people and guilds, and he's just very active in the faith in the Archdiocese of Washington. So I'm excited to speak with him and hopefully even have him talk a little bit about his mom, being that Mother's Day is coming up this weekend, right? Sunday the 14th. Very excited to have Father Chris Seith on with us. His book, Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. Priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., Director of Spiritual Formation for the John Paul II Seminary there as well. And I would say, Father, sorry, but most importantly, the son of Johnny Seith. Just saying.
That is very fair, yes.
All right, so I interrupt you. I should say we got interrupted by the music, but you were asking me about where we were based, and yes, we are based in Domino's Farms, at least Ave Maria Radio. It's co-produced by EWTN, but this show comes from Domino's Farms. You have a connection to Domino's Farms?
Well, so I actually just celebrated the Triduum this past year with the sisters, the Dominican sisters, the Mary Mother of the Eucharist.
Oh, they're amazing, aren't they?
I know, it's such a gift.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Well, listen, I wanted to just talk to you first about your story, a little bit about your vocation. Let's start there. And looking at Mother's Day is this weekend, maybe your mom had an influence on you, I'm thinking?
Oh, my goodness. Absolutely. Yeah, just, for the listeners that heard the interview with my mom, with her suffering and everything, obviously seeing the power of sacrifice. And also, my dad and his relationship to my mom, just seeing just the power of a man staying faithful to his vows in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, and just the love that's so needed to be made present in our world. So they were huge. Mom and Dad, and their love for each other and the fidelity, it's just huge. And then, and I'm sure I'll talk about my parents later on, but another, big thing was just when I was in college, the priest who is the chaplain at University of Maryland where I went, his joy that he just radiated to the students and just wanting to kind of participate in that. Like, there was such a kind of dark world in college, and seeing how he brought so many to life. And then also it helped that all the girls that I had asked out on dates said no because they were entering convents. So
that made it a little bit easier, right?
Yeah, I like to tell people that God and I have the same taste in women.
Oh, that's
so
sweet.
But seeing, honestly, it was really big seeing just the beauty of their lives, and then thinking, okay, if giving up my life as a priest can help people belong totally to God, and that this beauty can be radiant in others, I want to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I think people forget that priests are indeed married. You are married to the church.
Oh, that's just it.
That's a whole nother commitment, right?
Yep.
Very powerful.
Very much so.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because you're very busy. You were telling me during the break you've been a priest now for 9 years. You're director of spiritual formation for John Paul II Seminary, and you're known as a rising star, extremely popular. And you gave a great homily a few years ago at the Mass for Life, and so you're much loved by young people as well. In terms of your
you clearly spoke with my mom before.
Yes, I did. She gave me all the notes. I had to trim them down a little bit, but I said, no problem, Johnny. I'll get as much in as I can. Hey, we girls got to help each other out, right?
There you go.
No, but I mean, you really have a great reputation for the work that you're doing. What part of your priesthood would you say is there a way to kind of capitalize on what's your favorite? What do you love to do the most as a priest? Or does it vary?
Oh, my gosh. It varies. Right now, most of my life is spent doing spiritual direction, which I love, just being able to kind of do that deep work of helping someone receive the Father's love and just living in that more and more consistently and constantly, right? So St. Paul says to pray without ceasing, and to help someone live more and more interiorly. It's just beautiful, and especially right now helping men who are studying to be priests live in that way so that they can bring others into that relationship with God is so rewarding. So I love spiritual direction and kind of also the healing that takes place in there, or in that context. I love preaching and helping others enter into the world that really just into the mind of God, right? St. Paul, do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Yeah. And just the life that's there. So I love bringing people out of the darkness of this world into light through spiritual direction and preaching are two of the prominent
Well, that makes sense, given the title of your book, Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. Yeah. If you're just joining us on a Wednesday morning edition of Catholic Connection, having a beautiful conversation with Father Chris Seith from the Archdiocese of Washington, because in order to rekindle that wonder, we need to put the phone down. We need to back away from the screen. And Pope Francis just talked about this when he was in Hungary, and he talked about it again over the weekend, and talking about don't become couch potatoes. And we see this epidemic of loneliness that came out from the Surgeon General last week mentioning media in terms of not being present for each other. Somebody comes in the room, they're talking to us, and we're on our phone, or we're doing something else with technology. So rekindling wonder, it comes from getting back to basics, does it not?
It does, very much so. And also being vulnerable to the world in which we live. So much of our devices they're kind of defenses against being hurt, right? Your presence might, I might find it boring, or you might find my presence boring, or, but with our devices, there's always an out. I'm in control. I can keep you as much of a distance as I want. Whenever you inflict, your presence on me, I can just kind of navigate that so that everything's at a distance. So I'm connected to so many people, but because I'm not immersed in someone's life by being vulnerable to the other's presence or to the presence of reality itself, I'm not in communion with anyone. And so this is where this isolation is coming from. We've lost this capacity to be in communion because we're almost too connected.
Isn't it an attempt to control? Because this way I can control my environment. I can control how much, with whom I'm close, or who what I can just basically try to control as much as possible.
Yeah. No, that's just it. The control thing. So one of my favorite quotes from C.S. Lewis, he says, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken." And he goes on to talk about how he says the alternative to tragedy, or at least to the risk of tragedy, is damnation. That we enclose ourselves in our own minds. And this is the whole modern project of getting control over things, and we're really good at it.
Right.
But if we're in control of things, I'm not immersed in that thing's world. So there's got to be kind of some give and take, We've got to be vulnerable.
And we have to be willing to be with other people, and maybe we don't choose to be there, but we can't just walk away when we're in a situation and with people with whom we may disagree. I keep going back to the story that broke in late March. Cornell University had the common sense to say no to these students who had demanded that the administration sign this resolution where they needed trigger points if there were going to be discussions about something that would make them upset or it would be traumatic for them. And they wanted the permission from the school to say if something was too upsetting, I could get up and walk out and not be penalized. Or if I missed a class assignment, so what? And I'm thinking, what world are you living in? I mean, what are you going to do when you graduate and you're at work and somebody looks at you cross-eyed or says, sorry, I don't like your project? I mean, come on. Talk about trying to control everything.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I mean, it's ultimately a question of, like, how do we handle a world that has fallen into chaos by sin, right? How do we reestablish kind of order in this world? The seminary, we just went to see the show Les Miserables.
Oh, I love that. That's my favorite production. Love that.
It's so good. And this is ultimately the question it asks us to, or invites us to ask, is you have these two characters, Javert, who's very law-oriented and very much like it has to be in this order, and in this, so I'm going to be in control of things. I'm going to use the law to be in control of things. And then you have Jean Valjean, who basically looks at the same misery that Javert looks at and says, I'm going to infuse this with mercy and with love, and that's how I'm going to overcome this, because that's what happened in my life. And so it's this capacity, so again, kind of touching heaven, it's how does God meet us in our misery, and from that experience we're able to give that to others.
Amen. Let's talk more, Father, after the break. We're running out of time. We're going to get cut off by the satellite. Father Chris Seith having a great conversation. His book, Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. More with Father Seith when we come back. Thanks for tuning in to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. For all the programming information, EWTN.com. Father Chris Seith with us. What a joy. Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. Father is a priest of the Archdiocese of D.C. and Director of Spiritual Formation for the John Paul II Seminary there as well. So, Father, we're talking about your book. We're reflecting on one of our favorite musical productions. It's Les Mis. I can't say enough about it. I think I've seen it, as I told you during the break. It's so Catholic. I've seen it like 10 times. Every time it comes to the Motor City, I go see it. But, I mean, this is what it's like. We've gotten so far away from caring for each other and being willing to do, and that whole production, the whole book, and then obviously the Broadway musical, shows us what it means to be Christ-like and how you have that true joy when you put others first, not about closing in on yourself.
So that's just it. I think the show so beautifully gives the alternative that the church gives to the world in giving Christ to the world. You know, that, okay, so here's one option for dealing with chaos and disorder and things you don't like inflicting themselves upon you. One option is to assert control over it. Another option is to distract yourself from it. And our devices give us both of those options, right? You're going to get greater control over the environment, or you can distract yourself from these unpleasant situations. And then the church steps in and says, whoa, actually, how about we meet people in their misery and in the things that make them uncomfortable? How about we just meet them there and infuse that experience with love? And so that's what the church has to offer, who Christ is in the world as he continues to live in his bride, the church. It's just this presence for others to encounter an alternative way of dealing with misery. And it's just so beautiful.
It is. So how do you touch upon this in the book, Rekindling Wonder?
Yeah. So I begin just kind of laying out the bad news. And then I actually give Maximilian Kolbe as an example of somebody who's able to live in a world that's so dehumanizing and yet is able to bring this really beatifying and humanizing presence to Auschwitz. Obviously, Maximilian Kolbe so beautifully laying down his life and really giving life to others through that. And so I do it kind of in two ways. One, I just show how the church, by being who she is, by being one who is set apart to offer worship to God, brings us into a whole different world that we're not used to living in. It's not kind of just like when we go to Mass, okay, it's part of the routine of workaday world. No, we're entering into a totally different dimension where the world now is for the sake of this transcendental communion with God. So just by being who she is, also just her celebratory nature, like everything the church does is feast, because she's celebrating the goodness of what God has done and not what we have done. And so she's constantly putting God first. So the church, just by being the church, is so helpful to the world. So the first thing I do is just help show how she can really answer a lot of the questions that our devices have caused us to ask. And then, and the last part, I just look at, because there's always the question, well, okay, what do I have to do to be free of my device? And I just invite the reader to become aware of what God himself is already doing in one's heart, in the use of his device in the first place, as he's using this, as he finds himself being kind of constantly addicted and drawn back into the sphere. Okay, well, where is Christ in that? And as we encounter Christ in union with our experience of living in hell, in a certain sense, in the prison of our own minds, as we experience Christ in that place, we're able to start finding freedom and just living by faith. So,
I think it's people get scared because they think the church is a series of no's. And I love the quote from Benedict XVI where he said, God and the commandments are not a series of no's, but a yes to love and to life. I love that quote. I'm probably butchering it a little bit, but I remember him saying that, and it just struck me so deeply, because the church is all about balance. And the church doesn't say, okay, get rid of all the media. I mean, we're talking on the radio. You're using the media. You're producing books, and so do I, writing books. We're on the internet. I'm sure you have a website. Yep. But it's all about balance in the church.
And what I like to tell people is, it's not at all about the no's. But the problem is that we've forgotten what the yes is, what we are saying yes to. And even if we know that abstractly, experientially, we have a hard time understanding what it is, what this life is that Christ is offering to us. And so it's an invitation, the book is an invitation to first taste that life so that we can remember what it is again, and then we can really start using our devices and seeing what limits and boundaries we want to put on them in order to just stay in this world that Christ is inviting us to live in. So the yes is so important but if we don't have the yes to Christ, the yes to our devices, we don't know what we're dealing with, even the no,
right,
to our devices, so.
But don't you think that the verse, for example, John 10:10, I've come to give you life and give it to you abundantly, or where we're reminded that eye has not seen, ear has not heard, what God has prepared for those who love them. I know that many scholars, and I'm not a scholar, but I know that many scholars and theologians say, okay, that is a reference to heaven. But I truly believe it's also a reference to life in Christ while on earth. Absolutely.
So one of my favorite quotes from Blessed Basil Moro, he asked Jesus, teach me to use each sacramental communion with you as a preparation for the next, so that when my last Holy Communion comes, I may but exchange one heaven for another. The heaven of you in my heart with the heaven where I will behold you for all eternity, face to face. It's just, we're supposed to be living in heaven now, this taste of life.
Right.
And so what I find saddening about our devices is that the infinity they draw us into is just more information, whereas the infinity that God invites us into is depth of meaning and presence, and so it's much more life-giving that we can already start tasting and living here.
Well, it's a very important book given the increase in the rise of our artificial intelligence. With a lot of experts who used to work for these big companies are saying that they're sorry that they work for them now because they see where this is going.
Yeah. No, it is. That's exactly right. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma.
But yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep,
it's terrifying, right? I remember getting to the end of it and just sobbing, just in gratitude that they did it. But you're right. I mean, people are aware that something's off. And so what I try to do in the book is give language to what is off, and then to help people see, okay, well, where is Christ in this, and how can he lead us out of it? How can he lead us sort of out of the slavery in Egypt into the promised land? That's kind of the motif that I take for the book.
Yeah. Well, thank you for writing it. It's so important. Rekindling Wonder, Touching Heaven in a Screen-Saturated World. Came out in October, but it's still available. We'll put a link to it on the archive section for Catholic Connection. The author is our guest, Father Chris Seith. Okay, Father, not many people get to do this, but because Mother's Day is coming up, I want to give you the opportunity to say Happy Mother's Day to your mama, Johnny.
Oh, this is great, Mom. Happy Mother's Day. Yeah, she's probably listening. So Happy Mother's Day, Mom. And I look forward to seeing you on Mother's Day.
All right. Well, listen, it was great catching up with you, and thank you for this book. Thank you for your yes to the priesthood, and please pray for all of our listeners to the network, and for me and Deacon Dominic. Really appreciate it, Father. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Please pray for me. God bless you.
You've been listening to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo. Catholic Connection is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Our producer is Andrew Kruchek. For copies of this program or for more information, visit AveMariaRadio.net. That's AVEMariaRadio.net. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for another edition of Catholic Connection.